Hello everybody, my name is Luke Air, and forgive the dramatic lighting. It's 4 a.m. and where I am is not aesthetically pleasing, but I have to record this video, so bear with me. Welcome to my channel. The course you're about to watch was actually made in 2020, that's 3 years ago. I put it up on Udemy and Skillshare, and the reviews have been amazing. So many good comments, so many good reviews, and it's been wonderful. But it's been 3 years and my knowledge has increased vastly. There's been new technology, new software, new workflows. So I really feel like it's time to do a new course. But I really want this new one to be a whole lot more value packed than the last one. How I intend to do that, and which is why I'm doing this, is that I am putting it up here on YouTube for a lot more people to have access to it. But I'm really going to need you to engage. So I need you to get into the comment section. So you need to let me know what were some of the areas that you feel like this area was executed well, and what are some of the areas that you feel like I should have gone deeper into, because the feedback I get from this course is what is now going to inform the curriculum of the new course that I'm going to be making. And this is an actual promise. Depending on the engagement on this video, commenting, like it, share it, I might just decide that the new course that I'm going to do is actually going to be here on YouTube, free for everybody to watch. So I'm going to shut up now and let you get into the course. But disclaimer, this was 3 years ago. My on-camera presence, I had none, but the information is solid. So try and look past my depressed looking self and focus on the information that I was given. All right, see you in class. Now for this course, I'm going to assume you already have some basic editing knowledge with whatever software of your preference. Mine, however, is Adobe Premiere Pro and Adobe Audition, which I will be using to demonstrate throughout this course. Please note that this is not an introduction course to these software. There are already a number of courses available out there that do justice to that. Now, this is by no means a step-by-step approach to the post-work of every project. Every project is going to vary on the scope of work, budget, and manpower available. This course, however, is my approach that I have honed over the years for this level and budget of filmmaking. It will be very concise and straight to the point. If you will be using multiple editing systems, ensure the same version of your editing software of choice is installed on all systems. Also ensure that all third-party plugins and updates are the same across the systems. If you don't do this, and for some reason you have to open the project files on another system, you are in for trouble. Use proper studio monitor speakers or headphones. Commercial headphones have certain frequencies enhanced and tweaked to give a better listening experience to the consumer, but they are not optimal at judging and monitoring production sound. In terms of managing your sound levels, get a pink noise sample or use the sound from the color bars generated within Premiere Pro. Now set it to say -6 dB and then adjust your speaker volume till it's relatively loud, and then mark that point for the rest of your edit. If you don't do this, what you think is loud might actually not be because you raised the volume of your speakers a bit too high. The format being filmed on has a huge impact on the amount of storage you're going to need. Gone Girl in 2014 was filmed in 6K RAW on the Red Dragon camera, and they had 315 terabytes of raw footage to work with. A Break from Reality, on the other hand, was filmed in 4K XAVC on the Sony a6300 camera, and I had 388 gigs to work with. Ensure you have a backup and don't use cheap hard drives. Some brands that I've come to use over the years include G Drive, Western Digital, and Transcend. Please do your own research and get the best ones available to you. On the first film I edited, we lost a hard drive, and it was an old hard drive anyway, which I had warned the producer about. Luckily, it was just extra footage from a scene that was lost. Now, a data wrangler is usually on set during principal photography to dump and back up footage from the camera media cards to the project hard drives. On this project, however, because of budget constraints and the camera and codec we were filming in, we had enough multiple SD cards that ran us through entire days of production. So when a card was full, my assistant camera just put a tape over the reading edge of the card and safely tucked it away in the protective case. At the end of the day, I would then copy the footage and audio from all the cards to both a backup hard drive and the main work hard drive, and then go through them just to ensure that there were no issues and that we got all the shots. I highly do not recommend this. It gives room for human error. I could have very easily been exhausted from the shoot and missed some cards. Always have someone dedicated to do this. Now, Red Giant, Offload and Hedge are some good data wrangling software that help you double check all your backups. I personally haven't used any of them, but they come in highly recommended. I usually import all my footage and audio files first into a general folder. Then I go through them and start putting the footage and audio of scenes into their individual scene folders. So we end up with different folders with their scene numbers and all the footage and audio for them inside. For establishment shots, whenever it's not clear what scene they belong, I just create another folder named establishment shots. If there are voiceovers, I would do just the same. And if a shot wasn't slated and I'm not sure what scene it belongs, I would just create a folder titled unknown, and down the road I eventually recognize what scene they belong and reorganize them. Now, you could rename all your files according to each scene at this point. For me, I actually leave them as they are. I just make sure that every footage for a scene are actually in that scenes folder. If, however, I have a scene where there are tons of, say, B-roll footage, it's always best to label these clips using the metadata. This would really allow you to easily find clips later during the edit. At this point, I would sync up the footage with the audio. I do this for every scene. There is a simple way to do this inside of Premiere, but it has its limitations and would only work efficiently if all the footage and audio files have actually been marked and renamed in their metadata. Now, the limitation is that this only works with one clip at a time. You can't sync multiple video and audio clips at once. Also, if the scratch audio is not clear and has a lot of noise, it's harder for Premiere to sync up. Because of this, I prefer to use a plugin called Pluralize. Now, there may be one better by the time you're watching this. However, syncing video and audio is the main purpose of this software, so it's very easy to use. What I do is I just go to Premiere, and from each scene timeline, I export an XML file. I then go into Pluralize and import those XMLs, sync them up and export a synced XML file. Then I return to Premiere Pro and import the synced XMLs. I cannot stress this enough. You need to take the time to watch through every clip, of course now synced with audio. As I watch through, I start cutting in and out points of certain takes that I feel are really good, and sometimes even color them differently. I also disable false takes at this point. Taking the time to do this allows you to not just know your project inside out, but it also helps you to solve problems later. I edit each scene in its own sequence, but then I have a master sequence where I then place all these individual sequences. This helps me stay organized and actually improves the performance of my editing system. However, you need to think and plan ahead for this in cases where the resolution of the individual scenes is not the resolution of your master sequence because you intend to make some certain changes in scaling and rotation, etc. In the past, I've found that I start this way, but at some point I just copy out all the actual footage and lay them all out on my master timeline. This is just a basic edit of the film. It's essentially putting all the pieces together in unison with the script. So the scenes follow each other just as it says on the script. Make sure you use the best takes, that is the takes with better actor performance, no camera mistakes, no wardrobe malfunction, and incorporate as much of the material shot as possible. At this point, we aren't being creative just yet. We aren't taking chunks out of the film just yet. This is then shown to the director, after which you work on it together till a rough or first cut of the film is done. On this project, I showed the assembly edit to the producer as I was already the director and editor. The rough and first cut. This is a more polished version of the assembly edit. It gives us an idea what the final movie will look and feel like. It would often have some temp music, some sound effects, little color correction, and maybe low render VFX work. This is a good point to get feedback from people who are not part of the project. Try not to get defensive at this point. We want their honest first impressions and opinions. Take lots of notes, and then later on you can decide which of them you're going to effect changes and which ones you won't. On this project, this was a major problem because even though the script and story had been told in a linear way, I had actually edited it in a non-linear way because I was convinced it was a lot more interesting that way. However, the producer and creative team were of the opinion that it would confuse the audience and they wouldn't be able to keep up with the story. So I had to edit what was a dulled down version of the film, in my opinion. That version went on to air on 3 different stations on DSTV. However, it was flopping in its festival runs. I then re-edited the film using my original non-linear approach, and in a few months I got my first nomination for Best Editing at the Toronto Nollywood International Film Festival for the same film. This is a very critical and important stage. This is where you as the editor and your director have to commit to not make any more changes to the visual edit points of the film. At this point, VFX will come in, followed by sound effect and color grading, and they will all be working using the picture locked edit. So changing any edit points after this point will cause things to go out of sync, and this will take quite some time to fix. So take your time and revisit the edit as much as possible before declaring picture lock. You will never get to a point where you feel it's perfect for picture lock. You can only get close to it, and then use all the other elements like sound to make up for the imperfections. Editing is basically the art of telling the best story in the best way using the elements shot during production. It's an art form, not a science. So I cannot give you formulas and equations that will show you when to cut or how to cut. The software can easily be taught and mastered, however, the creative aspect varies with each editor. You need experience, instincts, and then your own creative style. Knowing when to cut as well as knowing when not to cut can be seen as maintaining a balance between boring the audience out by cutting too late or reducing the impact of a clip by cutting too soon. Sometimes we need to leave a shot running to allow an event sink in or allow the audience connect more to a character's experience, or my favorite reason, to create tension. For example, staying on a character who is obviously seeing something dreadful, but then not cutting to show what exactly it is. While you aim for the best performances of the actors for the scenes, you have to be aware of what's going on with everything else in the image. Keep an eye on the wardrobe, set design, camera movement, focus, etc. Try to avoid or cut around some of these mistakes to hide them, or don't use those takes at all. In simple terms, if your character is on a journey and they move left to right in one shot, they should also be moving left to right in the next shot. Now, even though this is mainly done during production, a flip screen or just the use of B-rolls can be used to fix this in post. It won't always work, but sometimes it does. Even though it's subtle, trust me, it does a lot for a film. The audience may not see it, but they will feel it. 80% of the time, please stick to the hard cuts and dissolves. A good thing to note, however, is that dissolves, especially across clips, oftentimes suggest time and space passage. Hard cuts, however, would suggest that two things are happening at the same time, but in different spaces. If your character is standing up in one shot and has lifted off the chair, don't cut to another shot of them still sitting down. Also, cut at action points, moments of impact, from something as simple as opening a door to someone landing a punch. J cuts basically means audio comes before picture, and L cuts is the opposite. Picture comes before audio. I mostly use this when editing dialogue and transitioning between scenes. Think of this as being between two people speaking. You won't watch A talk and then turn to B to then start talking. B will likely start talking even while A is still talking, which then causes you to turn to the already talking B. A great deal of your editing time is definitely going to be spent editing dialogue, and there are so many creative directions you could go with it. However, pacing and reaction shots are probably going to be the single most important advice I'm going to give you. The emotional journey of any film is never stable. Sometimes you want the audience feeling relaxed and empathic, and sometimes you want them at the edge of their seats and in the heat of the moment. You do this by controlling the pace through pauses and reaction shots. This is probably the hardest and longest thing you will learn as an editor, but I promise you, once you start getting a hang of it, it will revolutionize your editing because it did mine. For more heartfelt and relaxed scenes, the less cuts you have, the better. While for more high intensity and conflict scenes, the more cuts you have, the better. When you show a character having an emotional reaction, it triggers the same reaction in the audience. For example, a line of dialogue that will probably not have gotten the attention of the audience suddenly does, because we see the reaction of the other character to it, and suddenly we're just as emotionally invested as that character. As I mentioned earlier, pauses also control pacing. The more tense the scene, the less pauses you should have between dialogue, and vice versa. Remember your J and L cuts? This is where they are mostly utilized.
Mr. John, I'm Detective Claire Watson. I'm here concerning the phone call you made about your neighbour.
Yes, right. Of course.
Do you mind if I come in?
Please.
Thank you. Mr. John, I'm Detective Claire Watson. I'm here concerning the phone call you made about your neighbour.
Yes, right. Of course.
Do you mind if I come in?
Please.
Thank you.
Editing a typical scene. A movie is basically made up of a sequence of scenes. Although each of these scenes differ in context and length, the transitioning between them depends largely on the story progression. That being said, you are often faced with decisions on how to start a scene, run through it, and how to end it. There is of course no right or wrong way here, but a good place to start always is a classical way. The classic way is basically moving inwards, starting from the big picture, then going closer and closer into the details. So we start with an introduction, which is our establishment or master shot. So we see where the characters are, we see their positions in the scene. We then move into the medium shots where we see more of what's going on between our characters. You can actually take this and flip it. Start from the details, the close-ups and medium shots, and actually end on the wide shot. Feel free to experiment and get creative in your scenes with what you have. You must have heard it quite a number of times that sound is 50% of your film. I personally think it's higher than that because I believe at least 70% of the emotions the audience is going to feel are actually in the sound. When dealing with movies, your work with audio can be divided basically into 4 parts: dialogue, sound effects, ambience, and music. You need all 4 to build an immersive sound space. Nothing screams amateur about your work like poorly done audio. It doesn't matter which of the software you use, Pro Tools, Adobe Audition, Final Cut Pro, whichever one. Always strive for the highest quality audio you can produce. This, in my opinion, is one of the leveling grounds between indie productions and big budget movies. Don't get me wrong, you get what you pay for with sound, but if you know what you're doing, you won't need to spend a fortune to get good sound in your film. As much as you can do some basic sound design and dialogue treatment inside of Premiere Pro, it still has its limitations and is nothing compared to using an actual professional audio software. The dynamic link between Premiere and Audition allows us to move our project sequence into Audition quite seamlessly. The workflow will definitely differ with software, but the main goal is to get our sequence into our audio editing software. Ensure you send all your files. Don't disable or delete audio clips. A good example is when you have multiple microphones. You might decide to use the shotgun mic clips. However, don't delete or disable the lav mic clips. You might not be able to re-enable them in Audition. On this project, we primarily used a single shotgun mic, so there wasn't much selection needed. Use the audio to video workspace for easier navigation, however you can always customize it. Note the difference between the waveform and multi-track tabs. One is the whole project and the other is the individual clips. And anything you do in the waveform tab updates in the multi-track tab. Effects applied in the effect rack are non-destructive. They won't affect your actual hard drive files until you click apply. To stay organized, I like to label the tracks according to dialogue, room tone, foley, music, ambience, etc. I also create tracks that I keep empty and locked just to separate each of the categories. Now, although these are now separated, it also helps to be able to control each category at once. We do this by creating a bus for each category. So you would have all dialogue tracks feeding the dialogue bus, all sound effect tracks feeding the Sfx bus, and all Foley tracks feeding the Foley bus. This will help you a lot when you need to make adjustments. Rather than go through each Foley clip, you just control all of them via the bus. So basically how we create a bus is we just come to multi-track, we go to tracks and we say create, add a stereo bus track. And that's the bus right there. So let's say this bus, we are going to call this the dialogue bus. Basically all of our dialogue tracks are going to be routed through the dialogue bus, and we simply do that by coming to the feed of each of the tracks. So instead of master, we simply change it to the bus. We go to bus and we say dialogue bus. We go to dialogue B, same thing. We go to bus, we go to dialogue bus. So by any changes we make to the bus automatically affects all the dialogue tracks. It's not enough to just remove some noise and adjust the volume of your dialogue and then call it dialogue treatment. There are hidden frequencies in every recording that need to be dealt with in order to have good quality dialogue. Try and work more with the spectral display than waveform. It's more graphical and you can see frequencies visually in terms of hertz as opposed to the waveform where it's all compressed into lines that just show volume in terms of dB. The bright parts are loud and darker parts are quiet, but not necessarily in terms of volume, because our human ears actually perceive higher frequencies as louder. The core of the human voice is between 1000 to 3000 Hz. This is not to say that it doesn't exist beyond these frequencies, just that the core of it is right here. So if we wanted our dialogue to have more presence and bass, we would focus on raising this range of frequencies. However, since the higher frequencies are perceived as louder, if we wanted our dialogue to have more clarity, we would focus on 3000 to say 10,000 Hz. I often take out 100 Hz and below because that's where noise and rumble often live, and also the human ear doesn't really pick up on those frequencies, at least for most people. I might also go a bit higher than 100 Hz depending on the voice of the character. You are bound to run into audio with noise issues. Now, during location scouting and filming, efforts are often made to reduce the noise. However, not all can be controlled. A very good example is the ventilation system in hotels. They can't be turned off. Noise reduction, however, is very destructive. You want to do as little of it as possible because for every time you apply it, you lose the quality of your recording. Now, the noise you encounter will either be inconsistent or consistent. Noise from fans, fridges, air vents, air conditioners, this can be considered as consistent noise. However, a dog barking, airplane, train, these are all inconsistent noises. For inconsistent noise, I use the spectral display to locate the noise and then use the heel brush to try and fix it. For a more advanced approach, I sometimes copy frequencies at a different moment in time and replace the problem spot. There are definitely more advanced and alternative ways to do this, but this is what I do for now. Consistent noise is a bit easier to deal with. All we need is a sample or profile of the noise. The best point to get this is the gap between the clapperboard and action call, or just any general moments of silence within the scene. In your capture settings, ensure the FFT side is 512 so it goes bit by bit. A higher number will result in a stronger reduction that will ultimately destroy our audio faster. Please don't use 100% and 100% in your settings. The figures will depend on your recording. A good tip is to start low and work your way up. There is no magic formula to this. Just keep going up until you get to the moment when you started touching the vocals, and then you need to stop at that point. So for the noise reduction process, we just go to effects, go down to noise reduction / restoration, and we go to noise reduction process. Now we need to capture a sample of the noise in our recording, and we can get this at any random moment of silence in our recording. So let's have a listen and find one in this recording right now.
Do I ask him? If he's cheating, bad idea. Like he's going to tell you if he was. So what do I do? Before you go asking him what you're not sure, think about it. You may not like what his answer is.
So as you must have guessed, there are two people speaking, but the mic is on this lady.
If he's cheating.
So we're not going to be too concerned about the noise reduction effects on the other lady because this mic is not for her. So this ending bit is quite quiet. Which is fine, so that's what we are going to use. So we just select that, and then we come here and we say capture noise print. Now from here, remember to deselect this, and then we're just going to keep previewing it and adjusting the parameters till we have a decent level of noise reduction that is not affecting our vocals. Already the recording is pretty decent, even though the levels are not so high, but hopefully we'll still be able to hear some difference.
Do I ask him? If he's cheating, bad idea. Like he's going to tell you if he was. So what do I do? Before you go asking him what you're not sure, think about it. You may not like what his answer is. Do I ask him? If he's cheating, bad idea. Like he's going to tell you if he was. So what do I do? Before you go asking him what you're not sure, think about it. You may not like what his answer is. Do I ask him? If he's cheating, bad idea. Like he's going to tell you if he was. So what do I do? Before you go asking him what you're not sure, think about it.
So that sounds good, and so now we just hit apply. And there we go, noise has been reduced. Now I'm sure you're asking, look, do we do this for every audio clip or line of dialogue? Yes. There is a way of automating this process, of course, but I'm a bit of a control freak, so I do everything manually because different sounds could change in the surrounding over time during production, and I don't trust the software to always do a good job at spotting these changes. Now, prior to the last project I worked on, I had always had my picture lock before I did noise reduction. However, I always ran into situations where even with the 5 seconds handles, I didn't have a moment of silence to capture a noise profile. So on my last project, I actually did the noise reduction right before I started the assembly edit. Now, this is definitely a lot more cumbersome because we're denoising entire takes of performances, but it allows for a more accurate noise reduction process and even encourages me to try the automated process. It's very important you have some seconds of the noise profile before the dialogue begins, because the adaptive process will take a sample of this first before actually executing it. If you don't do this, you will have the first 1 or 2 seconds of your dialogue sounding very strange. So here I'm going to be showing you how to go about automating the noise reduction. Remember, I said it's very important you have some seconds of the noise profile before the dialogue begins. So right here I have 5 recordings from the same location. 3 of the recordings are from one scene and 2 of the recordings are from another scene, but they were both in the same location. So now, just to make sure that we are set up for success, I'm just going to open each of them and make sure that there is that moment of silence at the beginning.
Sorry, speeding.
And action. So I've said action, and I'm just going to cut that so I know that we have some space. There we go, because that is where the automatic process is going to quickly grab the noise profile from. So I'm just going to go to the next one. Slowly. And action. So all 5 of this, I know that we have sufficient noise profiles in front of them, so we can go ahead and start the automating process. Now the automating process is basically telling the software to record and repeat. So to get started, we come to the favorites tab here and we scroll down and we say start recording favorite. Say okay. So now next up we go to effects, we go to noise reduction / restoration, and we go to adaptive noise reduction, not the normal noise reduction, now adaptive noise reduction. Now of course we now have to use this first one as a sample to basically make sure that all our settings are fine. So I'm just going to hit play here.
Be sure with this.
Multiple lacerations to the abdomen. I'm pretty random. Whoever did this doesn't seem to have done it on purpose, but they seemed pretty angry.
So, take it. That's all.
Sorry.
Multiple lacerations to the abdomen. I'm pretty random. Whoever did this doesn't seem to have done it on purpose, but they seemed pretty angry.
So it's obviously not a very noisy scene, but I hopefully you could hear a little bit of the difference there. So we're happy with the parameters now. So all you now need to do is just click apply. Now that is what we want the automatic system to do for all the clips. So now we need to go back to favorites and say stop recording favorite, and now we need to call it a name. In this case it was the detective office day, because there were some scenes at night, and we just say okay. So now it's now time to do what we call the batch process, but careful, you must remember to undo the noise reduction that we just did for the first one, otherwise it would redo it again for this first one while it's doing everything. So I've just undone that, so everything now is fresh. So what we now need to do to get the automatic process in is we just go to Windows and then we go to batch process, and then we select all of them from here, same location. All these files are from the same location. We select everything and we just pick them and we drag and drop them right here, and then we come here to the favorites menu, and then we go down and we look for there it is, detective office day, and we select it. So it's going to apply what we did to all of these files. And then just before we hit run, we just want to come to export settings to make sure that we are fine. 4100 stereo 16-bit. I might prefer to change that to 48 just so that it's better. Make sure that it's stereo at this point, and then the bit depths can be 24, which is pretty much good, and we can say OK, and we hit OK here, and we can just go ahead and hit run. Done. That's it. All our files has been denoised automatically.
Multiple lacerations to the abdomen.
And that's how you automate the noise reduction process. Compression is a must if your film is going to be sent for theatrical release or television broadcast. Compression basically solves the issue of the volume of vocals going up and down. It needs to be consistent. So in simple English terms, compression basically brings the highs a little bit low and the lows a little bit high. It does this by working with frequency bands, which you can think of them as ranges of frequencies. So depending on your audio and with the knowledge of frequencies, it raises some up and reduces some down to optimize your audio. For example, since we know that 100 Hz and below is mostly noise, that range would form a band, and then in the compressor it would crush it. There are a number of compressors out there, but they all do the same thing. Some simply give you more control and features, but I'm just going to focus on the main tools found in every compressor in this lesson, using a simple one inside of Adobe Audition. Now, these are 4 main settings that you would work on across any compressor that you end up using. The threshold is basically at what dB the compressor should start working. So the minute the recording goes above that set dB, the compressor kicks in. Ratio is basically how harshly the compressor is going to compress any dBs that go above the set threshold. Attack is basically the speed or how fast the compressor kicks in once it senses that our recording has gone above the set threshold. While release is basically how fast we want the compressor to let go when the recording goes below that set threshold. Generally, we want the attack to be as fast as possible, and the release, we generally want it to be a bit slower so that we have a smooth roll-off. The side effect of compression is that volume is often lost. So make up literally means making up for the difference, making up for the volume that has been lost due to compression. Okay guys, just to demonstrate how the compression works. So this is a random audio recording without the compression. Let's have a listen.
I don't understand. What exactly are you saying?
We need to be able to gather enough evidence to build up a charge. If not, we have to let her go, pending while we investigate.
Now, this recording, it's pretty much that's sort of already balanced though, but you would still be able to see what the compressor does. So I'm just going to use the inbuilt compressor in the dynamics. I've set the threshold to -6 dB, ratio to 5, attack to 4 milliseconds, and release to 500, and then makeup gain I've set it to say 7. So now I'm just going to keep playing through, and I'm going to be toggling the dynamics on and off so that you can hear the difference.
I don't understand. What exactly are you saying? I don't understand. What exactly are you saying?
We need to be able to gather enough evidence to We need to be able to gather enough evidence to build up a charge.
Using the parametric EQ is basically targeting individual frequencies in our audio to enhance the overall quality of the dialogue by increasing and decreasing the volumes of these certain frequencies. This is used for both dialogue and sound effects and can be used creatively. For example, a telephone effect where someone is on the speaker is actually achieved by reducing the low and high frequencies, focusing on the middle. The high pass is used to take out the low frequencies and allow the high frequencies to pass through. The low pass, on the other hand, does the opposite. It takes out the high frequencies and it allows the low frequencies to pass through. Next up, we sculpt the vocals by removing the ugly frequencies. The technique here is to scrub through, expose these problematic frequencies and reduce them. The tip is to look for frequencies that sing or whistle. After this, we can then further sculpt the vocals by boosting or reducing certain ranges of frequencies to add either presence or clarity.
So if you have anything to say to me, say it and go. She says she's uncomfortable with you sitting outside of her house. So if you have anything to say to me, say it and go. She says she's uncomfortable with you sitting outside of her house. So if you have anything to say to me, say it and go. She says she's uncomfortable with you sitting outside of her house. So if you have anything to say to me, say it and go. She says she's uncomfortable with you sitting outside of her house. So if you have anything to say to me, say it and go. She says she's uncomfortable with you sitting outside of her house. She says she's uncomfortable with you sitting outside of her house. So if you have anything to say to me, say it and go. She says she's uncomfortable with you sitting outside of her house. So if you have anything to say to me, say it and go. She says she's uncomfortable with you sitting outside of her house. So if you have anything to say to me, say it and go. She says she's uncomfortable with you sitting outside of her house. So if you have anything to say to me, say it and go. She says she's uncomfortable with you sitting outside of her house. So if you have anything to say to me, say it and go. She says she's uncomfortable with you sitting outside of her house. So if you have anything to say to me, say it and go. She says she's uncomfortable with you sitting outside of her house. So if you have anything to say to me, say it and go. She says she's uncomfortable with you sitting outside of her house. So if you have anything to say to me, say it and go. She says she's uncomfortable with you sitting outside of her house. So if you have anything to say to me, say it and go. She says she's uncomfortable with you sitting outside of her house. So if you have anything to say to me, say it and go. She says she's uncomfortable with you sitting outside of her house. So if you have anything to say to me.
In the event you need more bands, just apply another parametric EQ, but ensure you don't repeat things like high pass, otherwise you will destroy your audio. Each character in a film sounds differently, so ideally you want to do this for every character and save it as a preset so that when next they show up in a scene, you just slap that on and you're good to go. Whenever the S sound is made or emphasized in a recording, it often sounds problematic and unpleasant. DeESSER is simply the method of reducing the loudness of this particular frequency. There is actually a specific tool called the DeESSER for dealing with this situation, but what I like to do is to use the parametric EQ to scrub through and identify the frequency, and then I use that information in the DeESSER tool. The center/frequency setting is the center target, the main or the strongest frequency with the S sound. However, we still need to adjust the bandwidth, which goes above and below that particular center target. The standard recording level for vocals is -12 dB, which is around the point where I like to keep my dialogue. So it's often between -12 dB and -18 dB depending on the scene. I also try to ensure they stay within that range across every scene in the movie. I tend to keep music around -30 dB and ambience around -40 dB. Sound effects tend to vary depending on the actual scene. Doors could be -30 dB, but an explosion could be -12 dB. I also like to reference other movies to see where their levels fall across different scenes, both quiet scenes and really noisy scenes. There are a number of other tools used in dialogue treatment that I haven't touched on, primarily because I think they are too destructive for film. In radio, yes, but not film. For example, normalizing and using a limiter, I just feel they are way too destructive for film.
You know, every day that passes, I get to see less of him. How is that possible? You work at the same office.
ADR. Sometimes you will run into audio clips that the ambience noise is just too much, that the dialogue is now unclear and no matter of denoising can save it. In these situations, ADR is needed. Now, even though a lot of Hollywood productions use ADR, I really would advise you to avoid it as much as you can because a lot of planning and technicalities and effort is required to really do a good job in ADR. If, however, you find yourself in that situation, Here are some tips. Use the same microphone that was used while filming. Place that microphone at the same angle and height as it was, or roughly at the same position during filming. Be a director and guide the actors' performances to match the recorded scenes, because it's been weeks if not months since they did those original performances. You must replace ambient noise or room tone to make it sound natural. Luckily on this project we didn't have to use ADR. There was actually a restaurant scene where we needed it because the noise of the open kitchen and ventilator was just too much, but luckily we took that scene out, and so no ADR. Isotope's Dialogue Match is a new tool to look into. I haven't used it personally, but it's worth giving it a try. When it comes to sound effect, there really is no one way to go about it. The amount and types of sound effects you can put in your project will often vary and depend on the individual story and genre. Action movies will definitely have lots of fight sounds. Horror movies will have scary gore sounds. Fantasy movies will have enchanting sounds. And each of these sounds can further be manipulated using some of the tools we earlier explored, like the Parametric EQ. With human sounds of Foley, however, like footsteps, clothes rustle, movement, you would likely have these in every single project. The main task here is acquiring these sound effects. A good place to start is stock sound effect libraries. From them you can get ambient sounds, human sound effects, all kinds of sound effects. The major challenge you will face with stock sound effects is it not sitting well into your scene, especially with Foley like footsteps. In this case, you might now want to record them yourself. I personally prefer to record footsteps and most human sounds myself because I can do so easily with items around my home and office. The rest I have no problem getting online, which is exactly what I did on this project. For most of the Foley, I recorded them myself, and then some of them I got online. I would usually have a spotting session where I identify all the sounds that I need to record, and then I go out and either to location or the studio and just record them. It's no news to you that you can't just take any music you like and slap it in your film. You need to secure the rights to use that music from the copyright owner of the music or the record label, depending on what license you're going for. If, however, you happen to know the artist personally and they aren't signed to any label or anything, you can always approach them and request permission to use their music. Just ensure you have it in mail or written agreement, just in case there are some misunderstandings in the future. The music for the teaser of this project was actually music from an unsigned artist named Martin's Hero, who I told about the project and my interest in using one of his songs. He agreed to it via email, and that was it. There are a number of sites available that offer music that you can use in your film for a one-time payment or a fraction of the cost on a monthly basis. The downside is that it's not tailored and exclusive to you, so your film might use the same music as another film. Some good examples include Premium Beat, Artlist, Epidemic Sounds, etc. There are a lot more others, but these are just a few of them that I have used. Here you simply work with a composer or music producer to create music specific for your film. On this project, I reached out on Fiverr to composers who might be interested in composing 2 or 3 tracks for the sake of portfolio work. I had 2 of them reach out to me. I sent them the temp score I had used, a soundtrack from Gone Girl, which they then used as an inspiration, and each gave me 2 soundtracks each. And then finally I myself scored 3 tracks using FL Studio. So joining all of them together, we literally had an original soundtrack album for the film. Now, if you have clean dialogue and your levels are set appropriately, like the examples I gave you, then you shouldn't have an issue with your music and your vocals. However, sometimes you would run into situations where some frequencies in your vocals will be competing with some frequencies in the music. Now you will be tempted to set keyframes at the points of the dialogue and then sort of want to reduce the volume of the music at those particular places. Now, that might be fine for, let's say, documentary and news, but it's not professional when it comes to film. The real tool to use here is actually the parametric EQ. So what we want to do is we want to create a space, we want to create a cushion for our dialogue to sit properly in the music without necessarily having to reduce the volume of the music. Now remember I said that the human voice exists between 1000 to 3000 hertz. So if we split the difference, that's about 1500 hertz. So I normally just take one of the bands to 1500 thereabout, and then I reduce that particular point. How much you reduce would obviously depend on the music and the scene, and then I just widen it a bit, creating sort of this bowl. So our dialogue is basically going to sit right here. So we'll maintain our audio levels, but our dialogue sits right here.
You can't? Oh, you don't want to?
Look, Tommy,
I don't think this is the right time for us to have this conversation. You need time to think. Take all the time you need to think, because I can't do this. Please, don't call.
Tommy, what? Vicky.
Over the years and the projects I've worked on, I've grown to see more and more how color truly affects how well made your film is perceived. Now, I think it's worth stating that the color of any project starts from pre-production. It should be built into the sets and costume and even lighting in cinematography. Coloring in post should be to just enhance that, not build it from scratch or magically change what has been filmed. For the sake of keeping our workflows simple for this course, I would color correct and grade inside of Adobe Premiere Pro using the Lumetri panel. But this can be done using any color grading software of your choice. Some tips before we get started with color. Your eyes are always on automatic white balance, so try to grade in a relatively dark environment away from the daylight coming in from outside, because over time it would affect how your eyes judge colors. For me, I tend to color grade at night, that way I don't need to start blacking out my windows. Take frequent breaks from the project, go outside into the actual daylight, have a cup of tea or something, stretch your legs, and then return with fresh eyes. Trust your scopes more than your eyes. There are no secret formulas, every project is different. In the last season of HBO's Game of Thrones, the episode of the Epic Night Battle, there were actually complaints from viewers worldwide that they felt it was too dark. View your work across platforms, tablets, phones, TV and projectors when you can, especially when you don't have a calibrated monitor like myself. Another option is to get your monitor calibrated using a device like the Datacolor Spider or X-Rite Display Pro. You don't need a fancy color grading surface panel. I've been opportune to use the Blackmagic design panels in the past, and even though it made my work a bit faster and it was really enjoyable, it didn't improve my actual coloring skills. It is and will always remain a tool. So your mouse really is fine for now. But if you are going down the route of being a professional colorist, then by all means, go for it. The RGB parade scope displays waveforms representing the levels of the red, green, and blue channels in our image. This is probably my most used scope when judging color because it lets me see the distribution of the color components in my image. This is the best tool for judging saturation and nailing skin tones. The more the saturation, the more the values expand and vice versa. You also get a reading of how much saturation there is of each color like yellow, cyan, magenta, etc. Here's a tip. Gray or white should be a dot at the center of the scope. So alternatively, you can nail your white balance by moving around the master wheels to ensure the dot falls right in the middle. This is the best tool for judging exposure and contrast. The top of the waveform are the highlights, the middle are the midtones, and the bottom are the shadows. Aim to have your highlights and shadows just merely touching the 0 and 100 IRE values. If it goes beyond them, you will start losing information in both highlights and shadows. Here's a tip. The waveform is actually the RGB parade overlapping on top of each other. So at points in the image where they are evenly spread on the waveform, you would see it as white. So this also helps you see how colors are distributed across your image. Now there are also the histogram and false color, but I don't use them for color grading. For shooting, yes, but not for post work. There's nothing wrong with using them, I just don't have use of them at this stage. Now, color correction, or what is sometimes called the primary grade, is basically preparing our images and shots for the actual creative look. So we go through every shot, matching and balancing them out. Now we have to do this because during production there are bound to be changes over time that may have not been so obvious when they were filming. For example, an adjustment of the lighting, change in the time of day, pickup shoots, etc. So we're bound to run into inconsistent images. First, we need to set our white and black levels because the human eye is more sensitive to contrast than color. And contrast is basically the spread of white and black across your image. Think of it this way, it simply spreads out the information in the image towards the highlights and the shadows. It stretches out the midtones. From experience, contrast plays a major role in the grade of commercials because it makes the products and people pop, and this also adds depth in the image. An image with more contrast is always perceived as having more clarity. Having set our contrast levels, we now need to ensure that the colors in our image are as they should be. White needs to be white. The image shouldn't have too much blue or green or magenta. A green shirt should be green, not teal. A person's skin tone should not be yellow. Oftentimes, not all the time, a well-color balanced image will have all three channels relatively equal on the RGB parade scope. The color wheel and curve are your major tools for balancing color. If there is blue in the highlight and you want to reduce it, you need to push the master wheel of the highlights in the opposite direction of blue, which is orange. And if there's green in the image, introduce magenta to cancel it out. The curve is an alternative to the master wheels, but here's my approach to working with it. With the master wheels, we do the push and pull where we adjust by introducing an opposite color into the image. With curves, however, we attack the individual color channel itself. That is, we're either bringing it up or we're bringing it down directly. People differ in complexion, but the skin tone is often around the same hue. So it's often about how bright or dark the skin tone is. Our aim is to get it looking as natural as possible, or better yet, what people are used to seeing. There's actually a skin tone line to guide you with the vector scope, so you can get nitty-gritty by highlighting the skin of your character and using your master wheels to ensure it's falling on that line. For my color correction workflow, I start by grouping scenes across the film that were shot in the same location. Now, you must take into consideration the time of day and other changes in the scenes, even though they were filmed in the same location. So I prefer to color correct these scenes first because the changes in the adjustment that I will have to make in the other similar scenes will not be so much. In each of these scenes, I then group similar shots together. For example, the master shots, the over-the-shoulder shots, etc. And then just like we were filming the scene, I would often then start with the hero shot, which is often the master shot. When I'm happy with the color correction of that, I then copy it across the other shot groups and then go through them and make minor adjustments and changes whenever necessary. So the basic idea really is that once you grade your hero or master shot, duplicating it across the other similar shots is easier because there will be very little or slight adjustments needed. So the idea is we grade the master, and then we grade all the B angles, and then we grade all the A angles, and then by joining them together, we have a consistently graded scene. Although we used only one camera system on this project, you may have used multiple camera systems on your own project. To be honest, it can be a headache to match them at first, but once you've done this for a while and trained your eyes to analyze and understand images, it really becomes simpler. It's not easier, just simpler. The professional way to do this is actually with color checkers during filming. The checkers are filmed on both cameras during production, and then in post, using our various coloring tools, we then use that to match both cameras. However, here's my down and dirty method. So start with the contrast. You can desaturate the image from both cameras to help you focus on this. When you've matched that, now turn back on the saturation and focus on balancing out the colors, especially the hue. Ensure orange is orange, ensure green is green, ensure red is red on both cameras. Finally, check the saturation on both cameras. If you've done this, you should have a decent match for both cameras at this point. Yes, there's the metrics, yes, there's Mad Max, and a number of other heavily stylized looks, but 80% of the time, whatever creative look you're going for wouldn't or shouldn't require you to push your footage that far. You should always think about the story and the mood you intend to set for your audience, and not just creating a look because it looks cool. Taking a cue from reference movies and photographs is always a good idea for building up your own look. The reference movie in this project's case was The Girl on a Train. Now, in developing the look of your project, there are really two ways you can go about it. First would be to develop it yourself, which I personally prefer. Secondly, you could use creative lookup tables, otherwise known as LUTs. I tend to prefer building my own creative look as opposed to working with a LUT for one main paranoid reason. I don't know what LUT is doing. It's kind of like when we're back in school and your teacher asks you to show your work and not just state the answer to the question. I can't see the exact technicalities of what the LUT is doing to my image because the person who created it wasn't probably using the same camera system and color space that I'm using. So I get paranoid that this could cause some artifacts down the road. Hence, I favor tools like the film convert or film nitrate, which actually works with camera profiles. That means the camera systems, the camera color space, etc. So that's the closest I usually go using LUTs. That is not to say I don't use LUTs in my project, I just try not to use them all the time. There are hundreds of LUTs out there, some completely creative, while some are tailored to film stock and movie references. You must have heard this before, but I cannot stress it enough. Don't just slap a LUT on your footage and expect it to work. You need to have your primary grades done, which we've covered, and then also adjust the intensity of the LUT itself to suit your footage. Over the years, I've tried quite a number of LUTs, and I have found that right off the shelf, some of them seem to work better generally with most footage than others. So at this point, we're done with the creative edit, sound design, and color grade. For color, if proxies were used for the edit, now will be the point where I relink or replace them with the native footage from the cameras. For sound, I export 4 main buses from Audition, giving me 4 master tracks: dialogue, ambience, music, and sound effects, that when they are laid together on the timeline, they produce the master mix of the film. This is also a standard way of delivering film projects to some distributors, because a major advantage is that it can be dubbed into different languages while keeping all of its original sound design. So all they need to do is replace the dialogue track. As the name sounds, this is the point where I will then work on all the text and graphic designs in the film. The opening title, opening credits, end credits, and any other text needed in the film. I personally favor using Photoshop for this because I'm familiar with it, but you can use any software of your choice, or you can even do it inside of Premiere Pro itself. Using the right font alone makes a huge difference. You can just head on to 1001 fonts. There are a ton of them there. Again, take a reference movie and build up from there. The graphics and title of indie projects are often poorly done just because they didn't take the time to do a good job.
Bless me, Father, for I have sinned.
It's 3 years since my sister died, and they still haven't been able to give me closure.
It's your anger and hate, Reverend Frank, and it's beginning to consume you even in your sleep.
Father, is everything okay?
Well, one of my sister's murderers was here today.
Sorry, Father, what did you say? Sorry, Father, do you have any new information in respect to your sister's murder?
Is there anything you want to talk to me about?
Maybe you should pray for me.
In Hollywood, movie trailers are actually cut and made by a different editor and company. But for this course and our level of production, this is where I would usually begin cutting the trailer of the film. Now, producers often put pressure on me to cut one much earlier in the post process, even before the first or second cut of the film. For the sake of workflow, I often negotiate with them to be patient. If I must, what I do is release a teaser instead of an entire trailer, because it requires less sound design, less coloring, and less everything. Now, cutting the actual film trailers and teasers will have to be a separate training course on its own, and I don't think I'm yet an authority to even teach on it. I can, however, recommend a course that has helped me a lot on my own journey to you.
I'm here investigating the death of Roland Martins.
I already told the other policeman what happened.
Your story makes no sense.
And I know I need another chance.
On the night Roland was murdered, where were you?
That is the problem. I don't remember. Whoever did this doesn't seem to have done it on purpose, but they seemed pretty angry.
Come on, Mom, not again, Mama, not again.
Roland?
I didn't ask for any of this.
Let her go!
I know something is missing.
I am your mother. I know all this.
I am your son. And I know Tommy.
So at this point, we are ready to deliver the final version of our project. We now need to export the master files. All editing software have multiple ways and formats for exporting. However, the exact format for export will largely depend on your distribution channel and its technical requirements. Theatrical releases will demand the Digital Cinema Package, DCP. Please note, if you are sending your movie to the cinema, please mix and export your audio in 5.1 surround sound, not stereo. Film festivals are often Blu-ray, but I think some of them do DCP now. For broadcast, the particular station will have specific requirements and options which you just need to follow. A common one being the megabits per second. Most broadcast stations require about 50 megabits per second. And because Premiere, Avid and Resolve are kind of the most popular, they often even send you specific instructions on what preset to select and change in the export window of your editing software. For web, because people will be watching it most likely on computers and phones, the specs will differ. Just try and stick to the recommended specs of each platform. So if you're putting it on Instagram, stick to that. If you're putting it on YouTube, stick to that. Congratulations on finishing this course and hopefully your own project. Thank you for sticking with me through it to the end. I really hope you got some great information and have been equipped with the skill and knowledge to tackle your own individual current projects and even future projects. Of course, some of it will take some time and practice for you to master, but I promise you, if you keep at it, you will definitely see a dramatic change in your work. I'm always in the discussion page and social media to share more knowledge and answer some of your pending questions that I may not have answered in this course, and also learn from you. Some of you actually know more than I do in some, if not all, the areas. So I look forward to learning from you too. Thank you once again for enrolling in this course, and I will see you next time.